All right. What's what's challenging you from Philippians? What are you learning? What are you seeing? What are you seeing? Just share anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be from the passage that the most recent video shared. It can be from any of the previous two chapters.
I'll share. I read somewhere, I think I'm mixing the youth study in this, but um, that our lives as a way to disciple can just how we live our lives, like without complaining, and can be a reflection of Jesus. And so that's a way to, like, maybe we are the only Jesus some people will ever see or hear. And so shining like stars and just living your life without complaining is kind of whether you're in jail or
Yeah.
living free, I mean, that's kind of what I've been pondering.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Philippians 2. That's I mean, you're talking about a time where that's really powerful to not live as someone who is constantly complaining or criticizing or belittling or shaming someone does stand out in our current culture, and you do shine as lights. I just recorded the last 5 sessions um, yesterday, and so we pick up where we left off, and Paul uses Timothy and Epaphroditus as illustrations of that. Like that, this is how these guys lived. This was their proven character. Matter of fact, Epaphroditus was so determined not to add a burden to someone else. He's sick and almost dying, and he doesn't even want his friends back home to hear about it because they're already anxious about Paul. He didn't want them to be anxious about him. It's just the attitude of self-sacrifice. That's great, Chris.
I was thinking along the same lines. I was reading that, and I think because of how things are right now, the scripture that Chris just read ends with that among you shine lights in the world. And it's easy to be concerned. It's easy to be troubled. It's easy, really easy to step into the fray because I should say for myself, I am concerned, what's going on and so on. But how do you balance that, with being light in the world? And I was thinking, I have a retired pastor's wife who was a mentor to me in my early teens, actually. And I still have contact with her. She was one of my mom's best friends. And I've started having a face there. When I want to put something online or whatever, if I'm careful, I'm just thinking, what would Bev say? How would she react to this? Because she's just such a godly woman. I just see her walking with the Lord. And for me, that's been a good, because I pray. When I pray in the morning, I want to be a light in my neighborhood, with the people I'm in contact with, but certainly, social media and anywhere I go. And so that's really been hammered into me, and I'm just continue to think about that.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, Philippians shows us that our circumstances do not have to be the primary barometer of our joy, of how we
Yes.
reflect Jesus.
Yes. And that 16 ends with that the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. And I think about that too as, is this the best of what I can give to Jesus and on his behalf as his ambassador,
It's good. Melanie, this has nothing to do with the Bible study, except that it kind of does, because it's about joy. How's the grandkid?
Wonderful. We're really enjoying him. He's very good. He's a very good, easy baby so far. So,
Yeah. So for those of you who
yeah.
don't know, what was it? Maybe a week ago, 2 weeks ago? First grandkid
three
came?
3 weeks ago, last Saturday.
3 weeks ago. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Thanks.
Anything else? Anybody want to share something? Maybe one more insight, and then we'll jump into our notes for just a few minutes. All right, well, let's dive into the notes. How about you guys go to the end of the notes? I'm going to start with the tools and some of the resources, and then work back to the beginning, because I think it'll help tie some of this together. But if you don't have the notes, I'll show it to you here on the screen. I put really 4 recommended resources that are going to help us with this whole observation. What are you seeing in the Bible? What's the Bible saying? And there's more than this, but these are just free, easily accessible on your phone or on your tablet or on your computer. And the first one I want to highlight here is the Bible Project. And there's a website here, but also these are some video overviews of the Bible, and they're on YouTube. And I'm going to show you the YouTube version here really quickly. I guess I was already there. There we go. And so what the folks at the Bible Project have done is they have created overviews of each book of the Bible. Now, there's a couple of books of the Bible, for example, Genesis, that's so large that they divided it into multiple sections. So they cover the first 11 chapters of Genesis, which, if you know anything about Genesis, really kind of describes creation, fall, sin, brokenness. And then chapter 12 begins with the promise of Abraham. So it kind of divides the 2 major sections of Genesis up. But if you go down here to Philippians, for example, these videos So these are really artistic, animated overviews of each book of the Bible. And so it takes about 10 minutes to go through it. But what they do is they highlight everything from author to audience to historical setting, and then gives you a brief outline of what happens in the book of the Bible. So it gives you like a 30,000-foot view of it. And there's one for each book of the Bible. Super helpful. I really like the Bible Project. And if you really get into it and you like it and you like the art, they actually have like a coffee table book of this, because when you get to the end of it, the whole drawing comes together, and it has the full picture of in this case, for example, Philippians, all together in one in one really kind of neat outline there. Now, have any of you guys ever seen Bible Project or used Bible Project videos? Great.
That's cool.
So here's another one that I think is really helpful. Let me pull it up. It's going to be on my iPad. No, it's actually going to be on the internet too. So I mentioned the NIV Study Bible notes. So the NIV Study Bible has all these notes in it, but they also have all the introductions and kind of scholar notes for each book of the Bible on the website. And I put the biblica.com website there. But so for example, if we go to Philippians, it gives me author, date, gives me some background, talks a little bit about the recipient. So in this case, it talks about how Philippi is named after Philip II, father of Alexander the Great. And then a couple of key highlights into the book of the Bible. So, one of the things we've been talking about is how joy is a major theme. And then a brief outline of how, in this case, the letter of Philippians is written. So again, that's super free. And there's one for each book of the Bible. And then, as we talked about last week, or maybe it was the week before last week, actually, the different types of literature. it gives you some insights into how to read and think about the different types of literature. So that's a really great option. And then one more I want to share with you. And again, this is another free one, but this is there's a way to get to it on your desktop, but it's much easier on your iPad or a phone. There is a paper version of it, but most of us have some sort of smart device. And so what I'm mirroring for you right now, this is my iPad screen, and this is the Faith Life Study Bible. I mentioned it as well a couple of weeks ago. So on the Faith Life Study Bible on my iPad, the screen's large enough that I can, on the left side, have the text, and then on the right side, it's got the notes. But what I wanted to show here is this right here, this introduction to Philippians. And so, whoops, tapped the wrong one there. So when I open up the introduction to Philippians, it gives me background, kind of that overview, again, the structure, the outline, some of the major themes. And if I really want to dive in a little bit deeper, it'll open up this Bible dictionary, and this whole dictionary will give me tons of information about Philippi if you really want to go all the way with it. But those resources, and those are just a handful of examples, what they do is they help give me kind of the facts, the data, the history, the context of the culture of the Bible, and it helps me discover many of the answers to the questions I'm going to show you we want to ask about Bible study. So back to the notes, we'll go back to the beginning here. But before I do, you guys are students. Are there some resources that you guys like to use to get this type of information that maybe you'd want to share with everybody? All right. There we go. So back to the notes here. This right here is a little point I want to make, and this is admittedly maybe a little bit of a hobby horse, as they say, but I think it's a really important to, when you're talking about Bible study, because this is such a popular question asked in Bible study, is we want to avoid asking ourselves when we're reading and studying the Bible, what does this mean to me? And if you read the notes, I try to create an analogy that if you and I, if we wrote an email to our boss today and we requested X number of days off, and here's when I'm going to leave, and here's how I assign my work to my coworker, and here's who's going to take care of my clients. And then 2,000 years from now, someone is in a classroom and they're studying that email for whatever purpose, for them to ask, well, what does this email mean to you? We would all say, you're not going to come to the right meaning. You're not going to understand. What you would want them to understand is that, well, in the early part of the 21st century, people used computers, digital devices, and they could communicate with one another. And they had jobs, and in their jobs, they had opportunities to take recreation. And you typically would ask your supervisor for the ability to take that recreation. And sometimes when you're gone, your coworkers, your fellow workers would help you with your assignments. You would want to understand that letter as you would want a student 2,000 years from now to understand what you meant when you were writing that letter to the person you were writing to. Or if you're writing down history, or if you're writing poetry, the question would not be, what does this mean to me? What did it mean to the original authors? Now, the question, how does this apply to me? What can I learn from this? What example can I follow? What course correction can I make in light of this new knowledge? And that's a totally appropriate question. That's an application question. What does it mean, though? How do I understand it? We always want to attempt, to the best of our ability, to understand what the original author was trying to communicate when they wrote it. Maybe a modern version of this is how some people imagine the Constitution, right? So there's a debate amongst kind of political philosophies. Does the Constitution evolve? In other words, does the what the authors intended in that, do we kind of shift that and change that based on history, or do we try to interpret it as they intended it? And so what your more literal people would say, hey, it might be okay to make adjustments to the Constitution. That's what the amendment process is for. But you should read it in light of how it was originally meant. And we want to apply the same thing to the Bible and really any literature. Does that make sense? Great. All right. So, this part is really important in Bible study. And especially when you have some of the resources we mentioned, it's not super hard, but man, it is the thing that kind of turns the light bulb on and helps you see more beautifully what's happening in the scripture when we work through observation. So here's what you do in observation. In observation, we're really just asking ourselves, man, what do we see in the Bible? What does it say? We're observing the facts of the text. And so we've been working through the book of Philippians. So I'm going to reference that as we think through this. But here are kind of your basic, what I call mostly objective observations, because most of the time these have objective answers. Every now and then they're not. So for example, no one is 100% sure who the author of Hebrews is. And so there's some theories, but the author of Hebrews is trying to make the point that Jesus is supreme and Jesus is better, and leaves his authorship anonymous. And so some people will say, well, the Apostle Paul wrote it. I don't think the Apostle Paul wrote it, but we don't know. So that's what I mean by mostly objective. We know who wrote Philippians. The author is identified. All the early church fathers agreed. And so that falls into the category of objective. So when you're reading through the Bible, we want to know, who is the human author? Who is the audience? Now that, and for the letter, that's easy. That it's written to them, or in some occasions, the New Testament letter will be written to a group of people, but then at the end it'll say, and share this letter in Laodicea, and so forth and so forth. So it became a circular letter. And so even though it might have had a first audience, it actually ended up having multiple audiences. But sometimes the audience is the intention of the writing. So for example, the Gospels had different intended audiences. Mark's Gospel, which has almost no Jewish literature in it, very few references to Jewish tradition, is written primarily for Romans and Gentiles. Whereas Matthew's is saturated with references to law and parables and in Hebrew references, and it's written to a primarily Jewish audience. So that helps us kind of understand the purpose of what's going on. When we ask, who's being discussed? Like, who's the figure? Is Jesus being discussed? When you read the second part of Philippians chapter 2, Timothy's being talked about, and Epaphroditus is being talked about. Who's accomplishing the action? If you're reading the book of Daniel, you begin to look at the different kings. Nebuchadnezzar's doing this, or Belshazzar's doing this, and here's the 4 Hebrew boys who are doing this. And as you kind of observe these things, it kind of begins to put the pieces together, and then you ask kind of the where questions. Where is the author? I mean, that makes a big difference in Philippians, right? So Philippians is all about joy and perseverance and endurance and contentment. Well, when you think about the fact that Paul is writing this from prison, it just colors it in such a different light than if he was writing it in comfort and ease. Who's the audience? Well, the audience in Philippi and much of the New Testament letters are sometimes scattered Christians. And so when Paul's encouraging them, they also went through a challenging time. And so it helps us understand that. Where's the action taking place? Is it taking place in Rome? What happens in Rome looks a lot different than Jerusalem. The context there, the cultures are so different. And then here's some what questions. And this kind of, You kind of go from 30,000 feet down right to the very verse you're looking at. What's the meaning of this word? This past Sunday, I was teaching in Colossians and focused on what the word firstborn meant. It's kind of an archaic word. We don't have a good English equivalent because that's not referring to birth order or origin in family, but rather status and prominence. So, what is the meaning of these words? Or what's the significance of this phrase? So you read, let me give you a little pop quiz here. What's the significance of this phrase? What is the phrase or a version of the phrase that we see all the time in Philippians? I know you guys know it. What's the phrase that you see all the time in Philippians, or some version of it?
Referring to the firstborn?
No. In the firstborn,
Just a phrase.
Separate that. Well, in Philippians, specific to Philippians, like when you see what is a phrase that gets repeated over and over in Philippians, or a theme?
Something about being
joy.
Joy. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Joy, joy, joy. And so when you're reading through Philippians, you can't help but see that just jump off the pages. And so you recognize, okay, there's something going on significant here. This person continues to say that. Or what is the implication of this statement? So here's a kind of a secondary phrase that is said in Philippians often. Paul keeps reminding them on two, maybe three separate occasions, you are not citizens of earth, you are citizens of heaven. Well, the Philippians were Roman patriots. Roman nationalism was a big deal. I mean, it's super applicable to today, where you have kind of this God and country almost equal footing, and Paul is combating that to the people at Philippi and saying, I appreciate that you're Roman, but your Romanness doesn't have anything to compare with what it means to be a citizen in heaven. So that's a statement that we're like, why is Paul saying that? Oh yeah, this is named after a Roman general. This is the named after the father of Alexander the Great. Roman soldiers retired and lived there, and it was a big deal. And Paul's having to help these Christians say, your Romanness is second place to what it means to be part of my kingdom. And so you see those phrases like that, and they begin to say, well, what's the significance of this? Overarching themes. And then there's this other part, and I call it the somewhat subjective observation, not because we can't really know what it means, but because there is a little bit of speculation here. We're trying to take all the information that we've gained in those first series of questions and understand, why did the author choose this word? Or why did he include this phrase? Why did he use this command? Why did he connect these ideas? And so we're by the time we get here, we're putting the pieces together, and we're really we're not reading into the text, but we are beginning the interpretation process, which we'll come to next time. But we're asking the why questions, because the why questions help us understand what the author is trying to get to. So let's take Galatians in comparison to Philippians. So almost no references to Old Testament or law in Philippians, just not the law, just not a big issue for the Christians living in Philippi. Romanness and allegiance to Rome and Caesar and privilege and power. That was the Philippians' greatest challenge, and they were doing pretty well with it. But when you read Galatians, you've got almost none of that. And you've got, guys, you got to understand what the gospel is. And they were obsessed over the law and tradition and dietary. And Paul is trying to dismantle not the old system, but to understand that it is not your ability to fulfill this. It's actually Christ crucified who does that. And so you see a whole different set of themes, and you're like, why is he doing that? And the reason is that's what that group of people struggle was with. And so it helps us understand what's going on there. Any thoughts on that?
That's helpful.
So one little practical tool or tip or whatever, how you want to think about it, and we'll jump out. We talked about last week, reading the Bible with a journal or having a wide margin Bible, including some of these notes in there until it just becomes the habit of your reading can be really helpful. Now it might take a little bit on the first bit. Like, so if you were to sit down and just start Philippians, you could probably spend an hour working through that. But once you understood who the author is, who the audience is, where they're writing it from, at some of these pieces, that would really change how you read that letter. And all of a sudden, when you're reading these different phrases, they don't just sound like archaic phrases that you don't know what they mean. You understand what Paul's getting at, which, as we'll see next week, is going to help you interpret it. And then eventually, the week after next, when we wrap it up, you'll be able to say, okay, how do I apply this to my life? How does this connect to where I'm at? How does this help me as a parent or as a spouse or as a coworker, as a faithful Christian? Where does this land in me? Because we have done the work to not ask, what does this mean to me? But what was the author trying to say here? Because if we understand the scripture the same way, which is to understand it, that God is inspiring these people to reveal himself and his beauty to us, we want to know what they were trying to get at, because that helps us get at what God was trying to get at for us. And so there you have it. Observation. What does the Bible say? So here's the homework. Between now and next week, I'll send out video 7. I'd like for you to take chapter 2, because we'll be done with chapter 2. And I would like for you to go and apply these observation questions to chapter 2, and then share a little bit of what you gleaned from it. So we'll have a little time to do that, but more specifically to these very questions that we put out in the notes. So look forward to that. I hope you guys have a great Tuesday.